June 15, 1944. Dawn broke over the rolling hills of Normandy, France, casting long shadows across the farmlands that had, only days earlier, become the newest front line in the European conflict. At the small apple orchard and dairy farm owned by the Beaumont family for 3 generations, 26-year-old Marie Beaumont rose early as always, despite having barely slept. The distant rumble of machinery had become a constant backdrop to rural life since the landings 9 days ago. What Marie could not possibly know as she collected eggs from the chicken coop was that before sunset, her simple act of compassion would transform not only her life but the lives of dozens of American soldiers. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how a single flask of water, offered in a moment of basic human kindness, would lead to an encounter between French civilians and American soldiers that would forever change how both groups understood the true meaning of liberation during one of history's most pivotal conflicts. The summer of 1944 had been unusually warm in northern France. Marie wiped perspiration from her brow as she finished her morning chores. The farm had become increasingly difficult to maintain since her father had been taken for forced labor in Germany 2 years earlier. Her mother, Elise, suffered from rheumatism that had worsened with each passing winter of inadequate heat and nutrition. Marie's younger brother Claude, only 17, had disappeared 3 months ago to join the resistance fighters in the nearby forest of Saint-Sever. The Beaumont women were alone, surviving on what their land could produce while navigating the dangerous politics of occupation. "The cows need water again," Elise called from the doorway of their stone farmhouse. "This heat will be the death of them." Marie nodded, gathering the wooden buckets. "I will take them to the stream. The well water should be saved for us." "Be careful," her mother warned, the words carrying the weight of 4 years of occupation. "There are reports of fighting less than 5 kilometers east." According to records from the United States Army 8 Corps, the 101st Airborne Division had been engaged in clearing operations throughout the region, methodically pushing inland from the coastal landing zones. Captain Thomas Harrington of Baker Company, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, later wrote in his field report, "By 0600 hours on June 15th, our reconnaissance patrols had identified enemy positions retreating towards St. Lo, with scattered resistance remaining in the agricultural areas surrounding Carentan. Local intelligence from French civilians proved invaluable in identifying remaining pockets of resistance." Marie led the family's 3 remaining dairy cows down the worn path toward the small stream that marked the southern boundary of their property. The animals moved slowly in the heat, their production already suffering from poor feed quality. As she approached the tree line, Marie froze. Lying half-concealed among the tall grasses near the water was the unmistakable form of a soldier. Her first instinct was to run. 4 years of occupation had taught civilian French to avoid military entanglements of any kind, but something made her hesitate. The uniform was not German. The soldier was not moving, but she could see the slight rise and fall of his chest. "Hello?" she called softly in French. Then, remembering the few English words she had learned before the war, added, "Help you?" Private First Class James Miller of Danville, Pennsylvania, had been separated from his unit during a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. According to his debriefing report filed on June 17th, "I encountered a German patrol at approximately 2200 hours on June 14th. During the ensuing engagement, I received a minor wound to my left leg and was forced to evade through unfamiliar territory. After traveling approximately 3 kilometers, I became disoriented and collapsed from blood loss and dehydration near a small waterway." Miller's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Marie's voice. Instinctively, his hand moved toward his sidearm, but he lacked the strength to draw it. Marie saw the movement and stepped back, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. "American?" she asked, pointing to the patches on his uniform. Miller nodded weakly. "Water," he managed to say. His lips cracked from dehydration. The tactical situation was precarious for both of them. German patrols still moved through the area, and anyone caught aiding Allied forces faced severe consequences. Colonel Werner Schmidt, of the German Seventh Army later testified at the Nuremberg proceedings. Standard procedure for dealing with French civilians found assisting enemy combatants was immediate execution of all household members and burning of the property as a deterrent to others. Despite this risk, Marie made a decision that would alter dozens of lives. She left her cows and ran back to the farmhouse, returning minutes later with a metal flask of fresh well water, the precious supply her mother had warned to conserve. "Drink slowly," she instructed Miller, supporting his head as he took small sips. After he had drunk enough to speak more clearly, Miller revealed his situation. "My unit need to find them," he said haltingly. "Radio. Broken." Marie understood enough to grasp his predicament. Using gestures and her limited English, she conveyed that she would help him to her farm where he could rest before attempting to locate his company. What Miller did not initially tell Marie was that his unit had been tasked with securing exactly this area as part of the push toward Saint-Lô, a critical crossroads town that American forces needed to capture. With considerable effort, Marie helped the wounded soldier to his feet. He leaned heavily on her shoulder as they slowly made their way back to the farmhouse, the cows following behind as if nothing unusual were happening. Elise Beaumont's face drained of color when she saw her daughter supporting an American soldier. "Marie, have you lost your mind?" she exclaimed in rapid French. "If they find him here, we will be executed." "Maman, he needs help," Marie replied firmly. "Would you have me leave him to die?" The ethical dilemma faced by French civilians during this period was profound. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Westbrook, a military historian who interviewed hundreds of Norman families after the war, wrote, "Perhaps the most consistent moral challenge described by French civilians was the constant calculation between humanitarian instinct and survival pragmatism. Every act of resistance or aid, no matter how small, required accepting potentially fatal consequences." Miller was settled in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, a common hiding place used throughout occupied France. His wound, while not life-threatening, had become infected. Elise, despite her initial protests, used precious medical supplies to clean and bandage his leg. Through a combination of broken French and English, supplemented by drawings and maps, Miller explained his mission and the approximate location of his company. He believed they would be advancing toward this area within the next 24 hours. If he could somehow signal them, they would extract him and continue their push eastward. "How many in your group?" Marie asked carefully, wanting to understand the scale of forces that might approach their farm. "Company strength," Miller replied, "about 170 men." This information startled the Beaumont women. Since the occupation began, they had grown accustomed to seeing German patrols of 5 to 10 soldiers. The idea of nearly 200 heavily armed American troops surrounding their small farm was both promising and terrifying. That night, Marie made a dangerous journey to the farm of their nearest neighbor, Pierre Rousseau, 2 kilometers away. Rousseau had a hidden radio receiver and occasionally managed to pick up BBC broadcasts that included coded messages for resistance fighters. When Marie arrived, Rousseau was initially reluctant to become involved. "I have my wife and 3 children to consider," he told Marie as they spoke in hushed tones in his barn. "The Germans shot the Dubois family last month merely for possessing a radio." According to Resistance Network records recovered after the war, the Calvados Department of Normandy had suffered severe reprisals throughout 1943 and 44. The German occupying forces had executed 114 civilians for resistance activities in the 6 months prior to the Allied landings. Nevertheless, Rousseau agreed to use his radio to attempt to pick up American transmissions that night. If he heard anything useful, he would send his 12-year-old son to the Beaumont farm at first light, with news disguised as a request to borrow farming equipment. Meanwhile, Captain Harrington's Baker Company had established a defensive position 3 kilometers northeast of the Beaumont farm. Radio operator Sergeant Paul Winters recorded in his log, "Weather conditions clear, visibility excellent, encountering sporadic resistance from retreating enemy forces, local terrain predominantly agricultural, offering limited cover, advancing cautiously with flanking security to avoid ambush in hedgerows. The hedgerows of Normandy, known locally as bocage, presented a significant tactical challenge for American forces. These ancient earthen berms, topped with dense vegetation, created natural defensive barriers, transforming the pastoral landscape into a series of boxed enclosures perfect for ambush. General Omar Bradley would later describe the Bocage country as the damnedest country I've seen. Dawn on June 16th brought young Leon Rousseau to the Beaumont farm, ostensibly to borrow a hay rake. Once inside, he delivered his father's real message. American radio transmissions had been detected, and a sizable force was indeed moving in their direction. They would likely reach the area by mid-afternoon. Miller, whose condition had improved after a night of rest and several meals, received this news with visible relief. Now came the challenging part: how to ensure his company recognized the farm as containing friendly civilians and not potential enemies. "We need signal," Miller explained. "Something Americans see, Germans not understand." Marie considered their options. Displaying an American flag was out of the question. No French civilian would have one, and creating one would be considered treason. Any overt signal risked detection by remaining German forces in the area. The solution came from an unexpected source. Elise Beaumont remembered the traditional quilting patterns her grandmother had taught her, including one called North Star that had been used during the American Civil War as part of the Underground Railroad. "My grandmother told me Americans used this pattern to guide escaped slaves to freedom," Elise explained as Marie translated. "Perhaps your countrymen would recognize its significance." Whether American soldiers from various backgrounds would actually recognize a Civil War-era quilt pattern was uncertain, but the white bedsheet with a large geometric star pattern would at least appear unusual enough to warrant caution rather than immediate hostile action. Master Sergeant William O'Brien, Baker Company's senior non-commissioned officer, later commented in a Veterans History Project interview, "We were trained to watch for unusual civilian behaviors that might indicate either threat or assistance. Anything that didn't fit the normal pattern of life required careful assessment. This training saved countless lives on both sides." By mid-morning, Marie and Elise had completed the makeshift signal. The bedsheet with its star pattern would be hung as if drying on the clothesline, visible from the main road approaching their farm. Miller approved of the plan but warned them to stay inside once they spotted American forces. "First contact always dangerous," he explained gravely. "My friends not know who is friend, who is enemy." The waiting was excruciating. Every distant sound caused them to tense. Miller had cleaned and checked his sidearm, determined to protect the women who had saved his life if the situation demanded it, though his injury would make him a limited defender at best. At approximately 14:30 hours, the distinctive rumble of American vehicles became audible. Marie, watching cautiously from an upstairs window, saw the first Sherman tank appear on the road, followed by troops advancing in tactical formation on both sides. Captain Harrington, commanding the column, immediately noticed the unusual quilt pattern hanging at the small farmhouse ahead. Through his binoculars, he studied the property for signs of ambush or threat. "Hold position," he ordered. "Something odd about that farmhouse." Lieutenant Michael Donovan, the company executive officer, suggested, "Could be a trap, sir. Germans have used civilians before." Harrington nodded grimly. "Second platoon, establish a perimeter. First platoon, prepare to advance on my signal." The American forces methodically surrounded the Beaumont farm, creating a 360-degree security cordon. For Marie and Elise, watching heavily armed soldiers take positions around their home was terrifying, despite knowing they were potential liberators. Miller, recognizing the tactics of his own unit, told Marie, "I must show myself, but carefully. They might shoot before recognizing me." The standoff might have turned deadly if not for a simple piece of laundry. Among the American soldiers establishing the perimeter was Corporal David Goldstein, whose grandmother had been an avid quilter in Brooklyn. The pattern caught his attention immediately. "Captain," Goldstein called over the radio, "that quilt pattern. It's an old Underground Railroad signal. North Star. My grandmother used to make them." Harrington was skeptical but intrigued. "Are you sure about that, Corporal?" "Yes, sir, it means safe house, or it did during the Civil War." This information changed Harrington's approach. Rather than preparing for an assault, he ordered a more cautious advance, with clear announcements of their presence in both English and basic French. Inside the farmhouse, Miller had convinced Marie to help him to the front door. As American troops approached, he stood in the doorway supporting himself against the frame and called out, "Baker Company, Private Miller, James T., serial number 365491770. The farm erupted in activity. Within minutes, Miller was surrounded by his comrades, receiving immediate attention from the company medic. Captain Harrington approached the farmhouse cautiously, still uncertain about the situation, despite Miller's presence. "Ma'am," he addressed Marie formally, "I'm Captain Thomas Harrington, United States Army. Can you explain how my missing soldier came to be in your home?" Marie's English was insufficient for the complex explanation required. Miller, now being treated on a stretcher nearby, called out, "Sir, these women saved my life. I was wounded and separated after encountering a German patrol. Miss Beaumont found me by the stream and brought me here. They hid me at great risk to themselves." Harrington's demeanor softened immediately. "Please translate my thanks," he asked a French-speaking soldier in his company, Sergeant Jacques Benoit, whose parents had immigrated to Louisiana from France before the war. Through Benoit, the full story emerged: how Marie had discovered Miller, the risk the Beaumont women had taken, and the neighbors' assistance with radio intelligence. As the narrative unfolded, the American soldier's posture visibly changed from tactical alertness to profound respect. Lieutenant Donovan summarized the sentiment in his personal journal that evening. "Encountered extraordinary courage among French civilians today. A young woman and her mother sheltered PFC Miller at tremendous personal risk. When one considers that the penalty for aiding Allied personnel is immediate execution, their bravery becomes all the more remarkable. These are our true allies." What happened next transformed a routine military advance into something much more significant for everyone involved. Captain Harrington, assessing both the tactical situation and the human one before him, made a decision that would be remembered by both his men and the Beaumont women for decades to come. "Sergeant Benoit, please inform the ladies that we will establish our command post here for the night," Harrington ordered. "First, second, and third platoons will maintain perimeter security, and please ask if they would accept our assistance with any farm tasks that need attention." When this was translated, Marie was momentarily speechless. After 4 years of German occupation, during which soldiers had only taken from civilians their food, their freedom, their dignity, the offer of help was almost incomprehensible. Through Benoit, she finally replied, "The cows need milking, the vegetable garden needs weeding, and the roof of the chicken coop has needed repair since winter." What followed was a remarkable scene that none of the participants would ever forget. American combat soldiers, still vigilant for enemy threats, took shifts assisting with farm chores. Corporal Landry, who had grown up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, showed particular expertise with the cows. Private Rodriguez, whose family operated a vegetable farm in California's Central Valley, organized an efficient team to weed and water the extensive garden. Sergeant O'Brien, a carpenter before the war, directed the repair of the chicken coop with materials from the company's engineering supplies. By evening, the farm had been transformed. The day's milk yield had been processed, the garden was immaculate, and the chicken coop was more structurally sound than it had been in years. More importantly, a profound connection had formed between the American unit and the French civilians they were ostensibly liberating. As Elise Beaumont prepared dinner, supplemented by American ration items, she commented to Marie in French, "This is what liberation truly means, not just removing the occupiers, but restoring what was broken." The company's radio man, Sergeant Paul Winters, captured the evening in his unofficial log, established CP at French farmhouse. Unusual day. Combat troops engaged in agricultural activities to assist French civilians who protected PFC Miller. Morale exceptionally high. Men expressing sense of purpose beyond tactical objectives. First fresh milk many have had since leaving England. That night, as Baker Company maintained security around the farm, an unexpected visitor arrived. Claude Beaumont, Marie's younger brother who had joined the resistance, returned home after learning from Rousseau that American forces had surrounded his family's farm. His arrival caused momentary alarm until Benoit could translate and confirm his identity. The reunion between Claude and his mother and sister was emotional, having been separated for 3 months with no communication. Claude brought valuable intelligence about German positions to the east, which Captain Harrington immediately incorporated into his tactical planning. More significantly, Claude's presence completed the Beaumont family story for the American soldiers, the father taken for forced labor, the son in the resistance, the women maintaining the family farm against overwhelming odds. Private Frank Lombardi, a combat photographer attached to Baker Company, documented this remarkable convergence of military operations and human connection. His photographs, now preserved in the National Archives, show American soldiers and French civilians sharing a meal by lamplight, poring over maps, and working together on farm tasks. One particularly poignant image shows Marie Beaumont and Captain Harrington standing side by side, surveying the farm at sunset. The caption Lombardi wrote for this image reads, "The face of liberation, American forces and French civilians working together to rebuild what war has damaged. Normandy, France, June 16, 1944. Morning brought new orders for Baker Company. They would continue their advance towards St. Lo, a movement that would ultimately contribute to Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy beachhead. Before departing, Captain Harrington made arrangements that would have lasting impact on the Beaumont family. "Sergeant Benoit, please inform the Beaumonts that I'm designating their farm as a recognized friendly location on all Allied maps," Harrington instructed. "I'm also arranging for regular supply deliveries as our logistics units move forward. They are not to want for anything we can reasonably provide." When translated, this information brought tears to Elise's eyes. After years of deprivation, the prospect of regular supplies, flour, sugar, medicine, fuel, seemed almost miraculous. As the company prepared to move out, Private Miller, now stabilized but still unable to march, faced evacuation to a field hospital. Before being loaded into the medical transport, he asked to speak with Marie. Through Sergeant Benoit's translation, Miller said, "I owe you my life. A flask of water might seem small to some, but it was everything to me. I will never forget what you did." Marie replied simply, "And I will never forget that your friends came looking for you. No one is left behind. This is why we believe you will win." Within an hour, Baker Company had moved on, continuing their advance toward objectives that would ultimately help secure the Allied foothold in Europe. The Beaumont farm returned to relative quiet, though now with the profound difference of being in Allied-controlled territory. Military records indicate that Captain Harrington's promise was kept. The Beaumont farm received regular supply deliveries throughout the summer of 1944. By September, Allied logistics units had helped restore electrical service to the area, bringing electric light to the Beaumont home for the first time since 1940. The broader strategic significance of the Normandy campaign would be measured in objectives captured, territory secured, and enemy forces defeated. But for the men of Baker Company, their night at the Beaumont farm provided something equally valuable, a tangible reminder of why they were fighting. Lieutenant Donovan expressed this sentiment in a letter home dated June 18th. "We have seen the real France now, not just tactical objectives on a map, but people who have endured unimaginable hardship with dignity and courage. When we encounter resistance, I think of the Beaumont women and their simple farm, and I am absolutely certain about why we are here and what we are fighting for." The story of Marie Beaumont and Private Miller would have remained a footnote in the vast narrative of World War II, if not for what happened after the war ended. In 1947, James Miller, fully recovered from his injuries and discharged from the army, returned to Normandy. Using maps and his recollection of the area, he located the Beaumont farm. The reunion was emotional. The Beaumont family was whole again. Henri Beaumont had returned from forced labor in Germany in late 1945, thin and weakened, but alive. Claude had survived his resistance activities and was helping to rebuild the family dairy operation with modern equipment supplied through the Marshall Plan. Miller had brought with him letters from many of the men of Baker Company, as well as photographs taken by Private Lombardi. Most significantly, he brought news that Captain Harrington had recommended Marie and Elise Beaumont for the Medal of Freedom. an American decoration established to recognize civilians who aided the Allied cause. In a ceremony held at the American Embassy in Paris on October 12, 1947, Marie and Elise Beaumont received their medals. The citation, read by General Lucius Clay, stated in part, "Through their courageous action in aiding an American soldier at tremendous personal risk, the Beaumont women exemplified the spirit of Franco-American cooperation that proved essential to the liberation of Europe." Marie Beaumont would later reflect on the experience in an oral history recorded in 1978. "People often ask if I was afraid when I found the American soldier, or when I decided to help him. Of course I was afraid. We had lived with fear for 4 years. But there comes a point when you must act according to your humanity, rather than your fear. I did not help him because he was American. I helped him because he was a human being in need, and I could not walk away." The bond between Baker Company and the Beaumont family continued long after the war. In 1964, on the 20th anniversary of D-Day, a reunion was held at the farm, attended by 17 members of the original company, including Captain Harrington, by then a retired colonel. The Beaumont farm itself became a small but significant stop for many veterans and their families visiting Normandy in the decades after the war. Marie, who never married, maintained the property and welcomed visitors until her death in 1993. Military historians have noted that the story of the Beaumont farm exemplifies the complex interplay between military operations and civilian populations that characterized the liberation of Western Europe. Dr. Eleanor Winters, in her comprehensive study, The Human Face of Liberation, wrote, "The Beaumont case illustrates how small human connections, a drink of water offered to a wounded soldier, could cascade into meaningful relationships that transcended the tactical objectives of military planners. These human elements were not incidental to the success of the Allied campaign, but integral to it." James Miller and Marie Beaumont maintained a correspondence that lasted nearly 50 years. Their letters, donated to the World War II Museum in New Orleans after their deaths, provide an intimate view of how the war and its aftermath were experienced by an American soldier and a French civilian whose lives intersected at a critical moment in history. In his final letter to Marie, dated January 1993, just weeks before her death, Miller wrote, "I have lived a good and full life that would not have been possible without your courage. When people speak of the greatest generation, they typically mean those who fought in uniform. But I have always known that the true heroes included those like you, who risked everything to maintain their humanity in the darkest of times. A flask of water seems like such a small thing, but on that June day in 1944, it contained all the hope and decency left in the world." The Beaumont farm remains in operation today, now run by Claude's grandchildren. A small plaque near the stream where Marie first encountered Private Miller commemorates their meeting. The text, in both French and English, reads simply, "Here a flask of water changed many lives, June 15, 1944. Sergeant Jacques Benoit, who served as translator during Baker Company's stay at the farm, perhaps best summarized the significance of the story in his memoir published in 1988. In war, we are taught to focus on objectives, strategies, and tactics. But the true measure of our success in Normandy was not just in the ground we took or the enemies we defeated. It was in moments like our night at the Beaumont farm, when Americans and French recognized in each other a shared humanity that no occupation could extinguish. Marie's flask of water and Harrington's decision to help with farm chores may seem insignificant against the backdrop of massive battles, but they represent the true purpose for which we fought. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.